All right. Well, hello, and thank you for joining us for the September 2023 session of From the Bench Virtual Studio Tour. My name is Chad Johnson, and I'm the Studio Director, Resident Instructor here at San Francisco Center for the Book. Today, we're thrilled to have Steve Miller as our guest. Steve founded Red Ozier Press in Madison, Wisconsin in 1976, a fine press devoted to publishing literary first edition books in handmade limited editions. The press moved to New York City in 1979, where Ken Botnick joined the operation. The New York Public Library Special Collections purchased the archive of Red Ozier Press in 1988. In 1988, Miller joined the faculty of the University of Alabama School of Library Information Studies in its MFA Book Arts graduate program. That same year, he founded Red Hydra Press. And at UA, he taught letterpress printing and hand paper making and coordinated the program. Miller is a professor emeritus at UA. Steve was, for over 20 years, a co-director of Paper and Book Intensive, a nationally recognized annual series of summer workshops and book arts. He was a founding member of the College Book Art Association, where he was awarded the Distinguished Career Award in 2012. I'm very pleased to welcome my friend Steve Miller to From the Bench today. So let me share Steve's screen and we'll get going. Take it away, Steve.
Thanks very much, Chad. And thank you all for being here today. You deserve an extra gold star for participating today, and I award you that. Yeah, I've been making books for a long time now. And I would just say that the original inspiration and continued inspiration has always been poetry. In first editions, with accompanying art that supports the poetry somehow. Not that if a poem is about a duck, that it's a picture of a duck. It can often be quite opposite, but the same kind of energy as the poems. So let me go ahead and start to show you kind of what I have been up to for a while. I saw this horse thing by accident, and I just loved it. So it has nothing to do, maybe it does have everything to do with me riding on a wild white horse. We all have inspirations, right? And one of my early inspirations at the University of Wisconsin in Madison was finding this book that was in a reading room that I would go to every night, and it sat there just bereft. Nobody picked it up. I checked out. It didn't move at all. But I absolutely loved it. I felt very drawn to the human touch on it, including all these crazy marks throughout the book. And being a young, aspiring poet, you know, it just appealed to me. So, I mean, I've always loved books, but books that have character to me are so interesting, and also books that are of the size to be read. Another one of my inspirations was, you know, I was a student at Wisconsin, and every time I'd go to the laundromat, I would end up dropping quarters in the dryer, which I could ill afford, because I was reading Anais Nin's diaries. I don't know if you know her work at all. Some of you will. But in the middle of these diaries, she was a fantastic collaborator and knew all kinds of artists and poets. I found her address and I wrote to her, you know, just telling her, look, I'm having a hard time here because I've been spending all this money that I don't have plugging dryers at the laundromat. But I just want to tell you where I am in your diaries. I think I was at volume 4. 3 weeks later, I got a Northwest Orient envelope, and it was from Anais Nin. And the first line was, that was a poem, not a letter. And she subsequently sent me some books. One of them was about Count Laundromat. So, you know, everybody gets inspired for different reasons, but always, if you're sitting here at this talk, you've been inspired by something or some things that keep you rolling, right? Walter Hamady at the Wisconsin Art Department allowed me to come in and take his letterpress printing class after I had graduated from college. I had heard about letterpress. It just intrigued the heck out of me. And I wanted to make a book of my own poems. So he let me come in. And, you know, I was just hooked with letterpress after that. And within 3 months, I had purchased a Van de Cook #4 and brought it from Chicago to Madison and had friends help me haul it up to the second floor of this Hotel Washington, a place really that a bunch of drunk people lived in the other rooms. But I started my studio there. For 3 years, I did that, you know, of course, with metal type. And this was one of the second books I made. Like a fool, you know, my first book of my poems, I decided it was like the best thing ever on earth. And I got an airplane ticket to Washington, D.C., and I took my book to the Library of Congress, Special Collections, and into the director's office. And I showed him my book of poems. And I know he felt sorry for me, but he agreed to buy it. From there, I went to New York and went to some bookstores there, and I sold copies. It was like, what the heck, you know, what's going on? Well, with this book, the second book of my poems, you know, I made the handmade paper for it. I went in the paper mill to make blue jean paper wearing blue jeans. And I ran out of blue jean fiber in the middle of making this paper. So I left that afternoon wearing the shortest possible legal pair of blue jean shorts that you could have, right? After 3 years, I moved to New York City. This was on Warren Street, and my studio and Ken Botnick's eventual studio is this half-round window at the top. And it was before it was fancied up, you know, but it was within a few blocks of the World Trade Center towers. So it was a wonderful time. I moved there because I wanted to be closer to authors and artists, right? There was no internet at the time. So we made books like this, you know. Richard Mock did these marvelous drawings I had never printed before on paste paper. Octavio Paz has always been a favorite poet of mine. I mean, I made books with unknown and well-known poets, and this was before Octavio won the Nobel Prize. And this was when we were printing that book. I had a chance to work on this book with, oh yes, oh my gosh, Noguchi, the sculptor. Charles Henry Ford let me pick 100 of his, you know, beautiful little haikus that he had written in the Far East. And I knew that Noguchi was there at the same time. They knew each other. So I went to Noguchi's studio, and he didn't think I could really reproduce them properly on handmade paper. I said, give me one and I'll do it. I'll print it on handmade paper and bring it back to you. And I did. And he said, choose what you'd like for the book. You know, I've always loved the New York Public Library. Special Collections, you know, they purchased all of my books, you know, one at a time. So I decided that I wanted to work with a group of students that had been with me in a printing class at the Center for Book Arts in New York. And, you know, I gathered my students together and I said, let's make a book and we'll donate all of the proceeds to Special Collections at the New York Public Library. And I went to the public library. They said, great. But if we have a manuscript that you might consider, never been published before, would you consider? I said, sure. And they dug up this unpublished Faulkner novella. And John DePaul worked with us, over the course of a year of nights and weekends. And he made this incredible, multi-black wood engravings for the book. We sold all the edition out within 2.5 days. It was in the New York media. And so people saw it and they bought it. I was fortunate to be asked to come to the University of Alabama in 1988 to teach letterpress printing and hand paper making and to coordinate the program. And that, by the way, was the oldest press in Alabama. It was a newspaper press, and it moved from town to town in Alabama. I love working on these Vandercook flatbed proof presses. They're my joy. I love to print. I love printing. And I recognize, that photopolymer plates were also, for me, a valid way of reproducing type and images, drawings. So I started to employ that. I was able to, as part of my adventures of being a faculty member, I was able to travel to Mexico with our Alabama Cozo, this sort of native paper mulberry that I learned how to work with and taught my students. And I went to a Mexican village way in the mountains, right? And we made these sheets over the course of 2 days with my Alabama Cozo. And they said, what should we do for the feature of this big piece? And I said, let's, if we could do this, could we use the yellowhammer bird of Alabama, the state bird of Alabama, the double-headed eagle, that's the sign of your village, and the elephant, that is the mascot for the Roll Tide Alabama football team. And we did, and it worked out great. I'm allowed into the bookbindery every now and again. Anna Embry, who's our bookbinder, is absolutely fantastic. And she's done a lot to teach me how to do book bindings. So I love to do the whole process all the way through, from choosing the author and the artist to designing the book, page size, page shape, typeface, line length, to the cutting of the paper and the printing of the sheets. And I always have some kind of critter nearby me for good luck. This was this little robot creature, and I was delighted one day when he said, "Greetings, master," to me. It was sweet. So I get inspired from everything around me. I have a big backyard and I roam around with my dogs every day. And in this case, I was looking for sky colors, actually, for this book, or for this broadside that I was making, that was All Praise the Golden Dog in my backyard. One morning, I watched the sunrise, and it seemed to me that out of that sunrise blasted this golden dog. So I wrote this piece that was the story of all of the dogs that have been in my life and printed it. Gold. Gold is hard to do. I love process. If you could see me right now, I don't know if you can see me right now, but this little book I'm showing you right now, it's a perfect little square of a book that I loved making. And I make these diagrams for every project that I work on, telling me where the signatures are, where the pages are, where the colors are, how it has to break down. And the little thing to the right there is, of all of the colors, which colors do I have to reproduce on which pages in what part of the book? Wow, I loved it. I love making this book. And of course, piles. A lot of you are like me, you have piles of books everywhere at your house. I have piles of books everywhere at my house. And I sometimes wonder if I'm more interested in piles than I'm interested in individual books. Well, I love piles anyway. And I love, like, this book with Cade Cullum, who is a boy from Slapout, Alabama, that I worked with on a couple of projects. And Craig Weatherspoon, the sculptor here at the university, I did his I used his preliminary drawings for huge monumental size aluminum sculptures in this book, where I featured pages that were translucent, that would work on both sides. And it was really, really fun. I've worked with Billy Collins a lot. Some of you may know him as, a really great poet. And, he was poet laureate for a long time. But, I finished this and I sent him to Billy, and he absolutely hated the background. He thought that it took away from his poems. But I tell you what, I'm not going to just print a poem on a blank page. I mean, there's more to it than that. And I stand by this project. And it's a collaboration with me and John Horn, a printer, friend of mine, and Sarah Marshall, the printmaker. One of the great moments that I've had in 2002, I was able to go with a group of deans at the university to Havana, Cuba. They wanted to sit in meeting rooms with other deans at Havana University. And that lasted for me about a half a day. And then I went out and I met a friend that I met online, a Cuban artist. We went and we rented a vehicle. He couldn't drive, so I had to drive through these crazy streets of Havana, and we started to meet Cuban artists. And by the time I left that trip, I knew that I needed to work with my students in Havana with Havana-based artists. So this is the Taller Experimental de Grafica, where I've done a lot of work. And this is typical, these kind of meetings where on the right, Arturo was translating. In the beginning, I had to have a translator help me, but, after a while, the artists in us all communicated perfectly fine. So I had made a lot of photographs of these feral dogs that would sit underneath, or lay underneath restaurant tables at night. Were just these lost dogs. And I went back, to my artist here, Julio Peralta. I said, can you, because he always worked with human skeletons, could you work with dogs? And he said, yes. And so I was printing this at the Penland School of Crafts in North Carolina. And that neon colored one you see on the upper right, I had printed the background, the black background first. I mixed up this green, this nuclear green. I put it on the press. I ran the first proof and I screamed because it was so good. I ran down to the coffee shop and got a great big coffee and belted it down and came back and printed those books. So this other one, Skin, I did with him also. Ramon is an artist that I've worked with a couple of times. And this is at a little restaurant in Havana. I had seen him working next to the presses that I was working at the Taller. And he was taking these large pieces of acrylic, right? Plastic, and cutting these pieces in plastic, multiple layers of color they would lay over each. It would be a couple of weeks before he could finish just one of the plates. It amazed me. So, I wanted to work on La Carrera, a book with him. Omar Perez, I had met, the poet in Havana. He is quite a storied guy. And Ramon, of course. So this is my plan for this book. The poet made these remarks, right? I tried to do the same thing in print. And there are about 20 of these different prints inside this object with this great eyeball on the front of the book. I gave him all these little tiny blocks, said, just cut what you want and I will make a book out of it. And I did. David Sorrell, a San Francisco-based writer for Apple and poet, contributed the words. I made photopolymer plates. I did a lot of the work on computer. and began printing. Oh, one of the great pleasures, of course, is seeing all these pieces coming off the press. And then the collation, it starts to become real. The hole punching, a million holes. And then the binding part. And all of it, if you love process and you like taking your time, there's a great deal of pleasure in the binding too. These are prints that I made, with Cuban artists when I was there in Havana. This guy, working with him was a great pleasure. We started this project 4 years before it started to become real. He made this diagram of what would be a miniature erotic book, a Cuban Kama Sutra I was interested in making. And by the time it came back to me, there were giant linoleum plates, giant. And so I took these to the Penland School. I hope all of you know about the Penland School and go there sometime if you haven't already. The cool factor is high, of course, in all the different studios there. But on the left-hand side is the book studio. On the right side is letterpress and printmaking. And the KISS was the name of that project. Done during the pandemic. You can see how little it resembles a miniature book at this point. And it's so great, to ink these babies up and see them pass through the press and become real. And the piles of them to become real. The KISS. And looking out at the mountains in the type shop as these pieces emerge, right? What could be better? And Anna Embry designed this beautiful portfolio to contain them. And then at this point, Julio was in Miami. I sent the pages to him. He signed them there and sent them back to me. The Castillo de la Real Fuerza, the Castle of Real Force, is a place that I attended on Havana Harbor. Every time I went to Cuba, and I went there 15 times. I was always amazed at this place. The first Cuban governor was a woman. And she would go up to the top of this and look out every night for her husband, Hernando de Soto, who had left for Florida, and he never returned. And I found that story so moving, so very, very moving, that I worked on this project with my student, Eric Coleman. This is a miniature book. It's 4 by 4 inches. And these images were made by him with a block, painting acrylic paint. And the more acrylic paint that he would add to it, the darker the image would become, right? Plus these sweet little things, these. So, it was a project, and, these winds rarely dial down, spoke to me. It's windy up on top of there. But as an artist, I'm 73 years old right now. And, I don't know about you, but these winds rarely dial down in me. I had a great opportunity to meet this artist, Voice Porter, in Birmingham, Alabama. We were both at a book conference together, and he gave a presentation that knocked me off of my chair. It was at the annual literary festival for Alabama. And so I connected with him at the end of that festival. I said, let's do a book together. I want to do a book of your poems. So we worked for almost a couple of years together, refining which poems how they would work. And this was so good. Alejandro Sainz, Cuban artist, worked with us on this project. And this is voice, before I finished it, signing all these sheets at a Starbucks in Birmingham. And you could tell the cool factor was very high with this person. Beloved in Birmingham and all of Alabama for his work. And when I brought the books back to him finished, he had tears in his eyes. I did not realize that it was his first book of poems. And 3 days later, he passed away from a heart attack. And I am so thankful that he saw the book, and it was a huge, terrible missing him. When you collaborate with somebody, you develop a deep friendship. So this was working on new projects. I just finished this book, Exactitude Along the Water, with a Wisconsin poet, Mary Weiner. Jane Marshall is a Birmingham, Alabama-based artist. And she did these incredible nature drawings. And I told you early on, that I don't do poems about ducks with a duck image, but, I broke a rule with this book because of these beautiful drawings by Jane. And the next project that I have in the hopper right now is a book of my own poems. The poems are ready, but Alioski Garcia Sosa, another Cuban artist, is on Cuban time, promising me almost every day that these are done. And he promised me 2 days ago that they were done, and I still don't have them, but they will happen soon. So, y'all, that's it.
Wow, that was tremendous. Thank you, Steve. What a tour through your work. I appreciate it so much. And we're a little over time, but that's fine. We can let Cuban time seep into our Zoom meeting here a little bit. Did anybody have any questions? I didn't see anything in the Zoom chat, but we'll just take time for maybe 2 or 3 questions if people have them right now.
Hey, AB, how are you doing? Out there spreading the word.
What was the name of your first book of poems that you showed?
That was Hurricane Lake. That was Hurricane Lake. And if I've done anything in my life, it's been to develop really good titles for books, So I'm just saying, I don't mean to brag, but let's see. Yoon Hee, how do you say your name?
They might have left. I don't.
Okay.
And the participants.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate seeing you all here, folks.
Well, I guess we'll go ahead and close it off there. We made it right to the wire, but just tremendous. So thank you so much, Steve. It was really just such a pleasure. Oh, well, one last question here. What inspired the name Red Hydra?
Okay. Red Ozier was my first press. Ozier are these dogwoods in Wisconsin that live in the lowest parts, deeply rooted, red stemmed. And it seemed to me that my first press deeply rooted me, being a floating poetry boy. And when Ken moved up to New Haven and I left for Alabama, I couldn't keep Red Ozier going. Red Hydra, for me, a Hydra is something, I've always been determined, no matter what obstacle stood in the way, I would figure out a way to keep going under the obstacle, around the obstacle, over the obstacle. And hydras are those creatures that they're microscopic creatures. If you cut off one leg, it grows it back. Nothing stops it.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. And thanks again, everyone, for joining today. If you want to stick around and chat with Steve a little after I turn on the recording, you're free to do that. We just hope everyone can join me in saying thank you to Steve. Really tremendous presentation today, and just a pleasure to see these books come together and see your process. So super appreciate that. And then one last announcement from our end. Next month's guest will be Mary Bruno. So that will be a fun. Mary is a letterpress printer up in Minnesota, and super fun speaker. So she came to visit last summer, and it was a hoot. So thank you all very much. I'm gonna hit end the record, and then we'll see you all next time here from the bench. So thanks for attending.